Hey guys, in today's video, I'm very excited to be telling you all about Qwibble. Now you're probably wondering, what is Qwibble? It's a really fun word game that was launched just last year, and it has a lot of similarities to Scrabble, but also a lot of significant differences we'll be talking about at length in today's video. Now, I haven't spent that much time playing Qwibble, but just because of how good I am at Scrabble, I'm a pretty decent Qwibble player. Recently, though, I took on Carl Madden, who is the highest rated Qwibble player and also happens to be an expert Scrabble player, and we had a really fun game. In today's video, I'm going to go over my game with Carl and use that to both demonstrate the basic rules of Qwibble as well as some basic strategical nuggets that might be useful if you decide to get started. Now, before I jump in, I would be very remiss not to give a shout out and thank you to Aaron, the developer of Qwibble, not only for sending me this very nice and comfortable Qwibble hat to use for this video, but also for all of the effort he's put in to develop and maintain the Qwibble app. So shout out to Aaron, and let's go ahead and jump into this Qwibble game. Alrighty guys, so here is the game of Qwibble I played with Carl. Now, my username on Qwibble is Goo Goo Dolls fan. Yes, I am a huge fan of the Goo Goo Dolls, and Carl's username is Enigma. I opened the game with Hazy for 11 points. Now, before we talk about Carl's next play, let's just make a couple basic observations about the Qwibble board. First, we notice that it's 15 by 15, which is the same dimensions as the Scrabble board, but the layout is very different. There aren't really any bonus squares, at least in the traditional sense. The vast majority of squares in the Qwibble game are just regular gray squares. There are, however, a couple squares with lock icons near the edges and corners of the board. And we'll talk about these a little more later, but basically what they do is if you play a word that covers a lock icon, then none of the letters in that word can be stolen by your opponent. Now you're probably thinking, wait a minute, letters can be stolen? Yes, that is actually the key strategical element of Qwibble, and is certainly something you do not see in Scrabble. In Scrabble, there is no notion of I play a word and you steal the points from me that I got for the word. However, in Qwibble, that is very much a thing, because Carl's next play was Zloty from the Z in Hazy, stealing the points for the Z and taking a 10-6 lead. So what just happened here, guys? Well, the way stealing points works in Qwibble is that whenever you make a play, you take control of all of the letters in that play, and also all of the letters in all of the new words that you formed. So by playing Zloty, Carl not only controls all of the letters he played, the L, the O, the T, and the E, but he also gains control of the Z since the word he formed used it. He doesn't take control of the H, the A, and the Y because he didn't use those letters. So when you make overlaps, you take control of a lot of letters at the same time, kind of like in Scrabble, how when you make an overlap, you get points for all of those words at the same time. It's the exact same idea. And you'll see that words and letters can get stolen back and forth multiple times, and that is a key part of Qwibble strategy and planning. My next track was not very good. As you guys can see, I had I-O-A-U-R-V-I, so 5 vowels as well as the V. Now, there wasn't really a way for me to steal the high point Z back, because I'd need to play through the letters in Zloty, and there's no way to do that. Zloty actually doesn't even take an S, so this was a very smart play by Carl. You want to really try to make words in Qwibble that can't be easily hooked, because if somebody hooks your word, they're going to get all of the points for that entire word back. That was part of the reason as well I chose Hazy, because Hazy doesn't have any front or back hooks. But on this play, I decided to play Uri to the E in Zloty, taking a 12-9 lead. I only steal 1 point back from Carl, the E, but I clean up my rack a little bit, and Uri also doesn't take an S, so if Carl has one of the 4 very valuable S's, he's not going to be able to simply put an S on that and steal all of those hard-earned points I just got. Carl did have an S, he also had the J, and in this position he decided to play Wine, interestingly saving the J, but getting a lot of points from me, taking a 20-8 lead. How did he get so many points? Well, let's go back. Right now, all of the letters in Uri are red. After Carl's play of Wine, the O, the U, and the R all of a sudden become blue, Carl's color. Why? Well, as I mentioned before, when you make an overlap, you take the points not only for the main word you made, but also you steal all of the points for the letters used in the overlaps, just as Carl would get points for O, I, U, N, and R, E if he were playing a real Scrabble game. So all of those letters, at least for now, become blue. And I, once again, had 5 vowels here. on my next track, and I faced a very interesting decision. Carl's last play of wine is very easy to hook on both sides. I have a D, and it can go either before or after wine because wind and dwine are both good. My first thought was to play idea from the I in Uri, hooking wind, and idea would actually cover the center right lock square, so I would lock in all of my letters in idea and they would become unstealable. However, while I would flip all of the letters in wine to red, the W, I, N, and E would not be locked as that word itself doesn't cover the lock square. So if Carl had a T for twined or another D for dwined, he could steal those right back. And as such, I actually decided to leave wine alone for now, and I played dote, taking control of the UN and the RE, figuring this way, if Carl decided to play something like wind or wines on his next turn, I might draw a D or a T and be able to hook it on the front. There's a little bit of this cat and mouse aspect of Qwibble. Sometimes if there's a word that's very easy to hook on both sides, you actually want to wait to hook it, because then if your opponent hooks it, you can take the other hook and really cement in the word for yourself. If you're the first one to hook, then if your opponent has the hook on the other side, they can take the whole word. So that's kind of what I was going for here with my play of dote. Carl, with, again, the S and the J, decides to play proa, a very nice move on his part, stealing back the letters in the O, the R, and the E, as well as the A and the I to blue. And with my next rack, I get down the first bingo of this game with naivete hooking twine. Now, you'll notice that the letters in naivete are a darker red. Why is that? Well, I mentioned earlier that if you play a word on one of the lock squares, then those letters are locked and no longer stealable. And that's what happened here, but I didn't cover a lock square. And that's because I bingoed. In Qwibble, unlike in Scrabble, you don't get bonus points per se for bingoing. But what you do get is the privilege of having all of the letters in your bingo get locked. So now if, say, Carl plays through that N, it's not going to turn blue as it normally would. It's going to stay red for the rest of the game. That's also particularly important because Carl has two S's, and normally he could hook naivetes and steal that entire word. But he can't do that here because I bingoed, and that is the main benefit of bingoing in Qwibble. Generally speaking, bingoing in Qwibble is not that good compared to bingoing in Scrabble, but in this case, it was clearly my best play since I locked in all those letters and also stole back twine. However, Carl stole twine back again, this time extending rye to raises, stealing back the W, I, N, and E. He doesn't steal back the T because that's locked. Now, Carl does spend both of his S's for this play, which is a lot. The S's are really, really valuable in Qwibble, as you can imagine, just because of the ability to hook and steal entire words. It's also worth mentioning that the blanks, which haven't came up in this game, actually cannot be S's. In Qwibble, you are not allowed to make a blank an S. They can be any of the 25 letters of the alphabet, but not an S, which is very interesting. In that aspect, S's are arguably just as good as blanks, if not in some cases even better than blanks in Qwibble, which is obviously not the case in Scrabble. Carl also covers a lock square with this play, so now all of the letters in raises are no longer stealable. However, here I made a very clever play. It looks like twines is done being stolen once and for all, but I extended it with untwines, getting rid of my N as well as one of my two U's, and taking a 34-21 lead, and now once and for all, making that word unextendable. Carl now finally got rid of his J, playing puja through the U and untwines, locking that word in and tying the game at 32 apiece. I drew another I, which I wasn't particularly happy about, and had a tough play here. And in this position, I decided there really wasn't a lot of opportunity for me to steal Carl's words. Because puja and raises are locked, I can't extend proa, and I don't have a hook for poor, so I can't really take any of Carl's letters. And as such, I decided to employ another strategy, protecting my own words. And I noticed in particular that done, which is worth a combined 6 points, note that the U and the N are worth 2 in Qwibble, whereas they're only worth 1 in Scrabble. I noticed that if Carl extended that or hooked it, then he's going to flip those 6 points from red to blue, effectively getting him a 12-point swing, which is pretty significant. So I elected to play ibis to the S in raises, not stealing his S because it's locked. So all I do is get 5 points, but at least I clean up my rack and stop Carl from stealing my word, which he was prepared to do with dung. So here Carl instead has to find another option, and he elects to play Gayan next to the H and A of Hazy, stealing the H and the A and taking a 42-33 lead. I draw a V, which wasn't exactly what I was hoping for. And again, I don't really have a great way to steal a lot of Carl's words because I can't overlap EH or NA. So I decided to play Tugger through the G and Gaian, scoring some points and also turning over tiles, hoping to get one of the S's or blanks, and I do indeed draw a blank. It's worth mentioning that I made this placement of Tugger as opposed to slotting it one spot to the left, because now Carl can't put an S on this word and steal it if he has it. It's a really important part of the game, guys, to be very careful about S hooks you're creating. Because remember, when someone puts an S on the word, they are going to steal the entirety of that word, and that can be a lot of points. Tugger would be an 18-point swing just for putting an S on it because it's worth 9 points. So that is something you really have to be careful of in Qwibble, and you really want to pay attention to how many S's are left in the game. Carl bingoed here with anti-gay and Anna. He doesn't steal any points from me, but he locks in all of those letters, making them impossible for me to steal. And right now, Carl has done a great job because there's really just no way for me to steal any of his letters. And I decided to just dump my V and clean up my rack, playing Ovary to the lock square, trying to minimize the amount of damage Carl can do to my words. And Carl here has drawn the other blank as well as another S, but he also has no vowels, so he doesn't have a lot of options. But he finds a nice insertion of Waker through the A and the E, getting 1 point from me and also scoring 9 of his own with the W and the K. I was still struggling a bit with too many consonants, and I decided to at least steal the W Carl just played by playing the word den, which I now locked. However, the W is not locked. Only the word den gets locked, because if we go back, den is covering the lock square, but the E is not on the lock itself. So the EW doesn't cover any locks, which means the W at least is stealable. The E is not stealable because it's part of den, which is on the lock square. But Carl takes advantage of that, stealing the W right back with of and few. And I noticed that if I draw the right letters, I could extend this with curfew and steal the F and the W back from Carl, but with my current rack here, I'm pretty far away from that. And I don't have a whole lot of good options here. I decided to steal what I can from Carl and drop my M with Mana, bringing myself to within 3. Carl now leads 60 to 57. And Carl makes a very instructive play here. He's got SR blank ICEL. He has a ton of playable bingos. But he doesn't bingo. He just plays Lice and Koveri, getting himself 7 more locked points. Now, why doesn't he bingo? Well, let's go back here for a second. If he bingos, he's actually going to get barely any more points than he does with Lice. Because remember, there's no inherent point bonus for bingoing in Qwibble. You only get the benefit of locking your play, which Lice does anyway. And there's no way for Carl to bingo in a way that steals points from me. So he's only actually going to be getting an additional 2 points for bingoing. And if he bingos, he gets rid of not only his S, but also his blank. And it's easily worth a 2-point sacrifice to hold on to those 2 very valuable tiles. So a very heads-up play by Carl of Lice. And I draw an E here, which is a very nice draw. And I also have playable bingos, like Globated from the G and Anti-Gay. But for a similar reason, I decided to pass those up. Because I'm not going to be getting all that many points, and I'm going to be using my valuable blank. So instead, I play Let from the L and Zloty, flipping the L as well as the A for a swing of 8 points, which is just about what I would have gotten with my bingo, but I hold the valuable blank. Now, the problem with this play, which I realized right after I made it, is that it sets up a massive spot to drop an S and steal a lot of points. If Carl has an S, which he does, he can play Yays and Dotes, and that's going to flip the Y, E, A, D, and T for a total of 7 flipped points and a 14-point swing. Now, Carl can do that here, but he makes a very astute play. He decides to wait, knowing that he has an S and that there's only 1 left, so there's a decent chance I don't have one. So he decides to play first Term, again passing up a bunch of bingos, stealing the T and the M, waiting to use his S for his next play. And here, I draw the X as well as another consonant, which wasn't great. I figured now I really needed to try to draw one of these S's. I needed to score some points, and I needed to get rid of a bunch of these consonants. Unfortunately, there's not a way for me to extend Term. That would be nice to steal all of those blue letters, but I find what I think is a pretty nice play here. Oxblood to the OD on the top of the board, stealing 1 point from Carl and scoring 11 of my own. Now, I do have to use my blank as an O, which isn't great, but I think it's justified at this point. I tie the game. Now, Carl here has drawn the Q, And he again can play off his S and steal dotes and yays, but he decides to wait one more turn, playing off his Q while he can with Chi and OI, locking that in by means of that square below the O. And it's a pretty close game now. Carl is up by 6, and this here is where the downside of let becomes very apparent. At this point, I feel like I need to use my S to play with dotes and yays, because if I don't, then Carl is going to do it and steal all those points and take a really large lead. So as much as I hate to do it, I decided to just drop my S here, playing yays and dotes. And this leaves Carl up 3 points, and it's his turn with S blank M-O-O-T-I. And he, once again, has available bingos here, which he sees, such as emotions from the E in raises. Now, the key thing to notice here is that there are actually only 2 tiles left in the bag from Carl's perspective. If you look at the unplayed tiles here, it's a little bit confusing, but 7 of these are the tiles on my rack, 7 of these are the ones on Carl's rack, and there are actually only 2 remaining at this point. Carl, of course, doesn't know what those 2 tiles are, and he decides not to bingo because he's worried that if he bingos and then draws a clunky set of consonants, like maybe a C and an F, he might not be able to go out on his next turn, and I might be able to go out in 2, kind of similarly to how I might in a Scrabble endgame, and get enough points while also stealing enough from him that I might actually be able to win. So Carl here actually just plays off an O. He plays Bow for 4 points from the B in Oxblood, stealing the B, taking a 10-point lead, and importantly, leaving 1 in the bag. By leaving 1 in the bag, just like with Scrabble, he ensures that if I manage to bingo, he's going to get another turn, and with such a strong lead, he's probably going to be able to then bingo out and win the game. And here, I knew I was in pretty big trouble. I know there's a blank left, I know there's an S left, and I figured after Bow, Carl probably had both of them. I basically knew here, given that I was down 10, I couldn't play scared. If I try to block, then I'm down. Carl is simply going to beat me on the closed board. So I have to more or less hope that Carl either misses a bingo or doesn't draw one. And I score as many as I can, stealing his play of Bow right back with Lud, Oil, and Bod, taking a 4-point lead. Now, Carl has drawn an H, and as you guys can see, the bag is now empty. I've got F, N, C, E, D left. Carl can bingo here with ethmoids from the E in raises, but that's pretty tough to see, and he does miss it here, but he finds a very nice play, re-overlapping Lud, stealing like that entire quadrant of the board with She, a 24-point swing, getting Carl 14 more points and depriving me of 10. And at this point, I am completely lost. There's no open E for me to go out with Fenced. I can't score nearly enough points. I find what I believe is my best endgame play, playing Fenced to the E in term, but Carl is still up 9. He can't go out here. He plays Fit from the F in Fence, taking a 17-point lead, and that's going to be enough to hold on, because I'm going to go out just dropping my D, and I get 4 points from Carl's unplayed M and O, and the final score ends up being 81 for me and 92 for Carl, so a relatively narrow victory for Carl. It's worth mentioning in Qwibble, when a player goes out, they just get the single value of their opponent's remaining tiles, not double the value like they would in Scrabble. Now, the cool thing about Qwibble is there are an odd number of points. So it's actually impossible for a game of Qwibble to end in a tie. Now, the only thing that could make it interesting is if the players didn't finish the game. Let's say you had a board that was so tight that neither player could make a play, and they both had to pass. Then at some point the game would automatically end, just like it does in Scrabble. And at that point, it's possible that the players could be even, but there is a set of tie breaks that is used that will always ensure that one of the 2 players ends up winning. It's extremely rare that that would happen. I don't know if that's even ever happened. Aaron could let me know if it has. But in any case, that's a technicality. I'm not going to get into that in today's video. But I do hope you guys really enjoyed this game and this Qwibble overview. Like I said, it is a really fun game. I highly recommend you guys check it out. I'm certainly hoping to spend a little bit more time playing it and improving my skills this year. And before I sign off, I do want to also mention that there is some talk of possibly a Qwibble tournament being run at some point in the future with cash prizes. Details still to be announced. And I'm sure once I have more information from Aaron, he will be glad for me to share it with you guys. But if that happens, I certainly plan on partaking. I think it would be super fun. So I will keep you all updated on that. Thanks so much to Aaron and Carl for helping make this video happen. Really hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks so much for watching and supporting my channel, and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.